Why has a celebrated senior police officer been sacked only months after a jury cleared him of fraud allegations in under an hour? Earlier today, a decorated chief inspector was dismissed by Greater Manchester Police. Tonight, Judith Moritz investigates why the former poster boy for the force has had such a spectacular fall from grace.
Oh, hi, good to see you. Do you want to come and sit down?
In January, Chief Inspector John Buttress of Greater Manchester Police was found innocent of mortgage fraud by a jury at Liverpool Crown Court.
I mean, what you're saying is the counter-corruption unit itself are corrupt.
They are, in my view, corrupt. And that is, well, individuals within there are.
That's a massive allegation to make.
It is. It is. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that I'm sitting here in a police uniform making that allegation. But I'm the person that's lived this.
This morning, he was sacked by GMP after being found guilty of dishonesty at an internal gross misconduct hearing. But John Buttress is still maintaining that the investigation has all been a witch hunt, which started when intelligence which was false was presented. A decade ago, John Buttress was a rising star within the force. He was awarded a Gallantry Medal in 2005 for chasing a gunman in Stockport. In turn, Buttress became a poster boy for police recruitment. His face adorned the walls of police stations across the country, advertising the fast-track officer development scheme. 5 years into the force, he'd reached the rank of Chief Inspector. But his problems started when he was posted to the Bolton Division in 2011. Buttress's new boss was Superintendent Steve Niblo. John Buttress says they didn't get along.
My perception of him was that he had elements of his behaviour that were not appropriate, and I believed he was a bully.
And were you the only member of staff at the time experiencing that?
No, I wasn't. I was the only individual prepared at first, and then I was joined by others who committed it to paper.
John Buttress claims that what brought matters to a head was his involvement in a force-wide project that made use of new digital police radios.
Around 5 years ago, John Buttress led a project to introduce new ways of working with these police radios in Greater Manchester. The idea was to make policing more efficient, but it wasn't popular with everybody, and John Buttress found himself accused of insider share dealing and taking backhanders from Secura, the company which makes the radios.
This accusation of wrongdoing led GMP's professional standards branch to question John Buttress. He denied he had any financial relationship with Secura, and John Buttress was convinced that a false accusation had been planted by his line manager, Steve Niblo. The BBC has seen evidence that shows that the superintendent was the first to raise concerns about Buttress's dealings in Secura. 3 days later, an unknown source made allegations that Buttress was benefiting financially from Secura. This allegation was false.
I rocked the boat and dodgy intelligence was put in about me.
Days later, John Buttress formally accused Steve Niblo of bullying when he submitted an internal grievance. GMP investigated the alleged bullying and cleared Steve Niblo, who has since retired. Today, he told the BBC,
"These continuing allegations are vexatious and without foundation. They've already been investigated by Greater Manchester Police. The Deputy Chief Constable concluded there was no evidence to call into question my honesty or integrity. However, Chief Inspector Buttress continues to do so, and I question his motives for doing this."
Though GMP ended its inquiries into the bullying allegations, a new investigation into John Buttress's finances began. It was run by the Counter-Corruption Unit, a section of GMP's Professional Standards branch. The Counter-Corruption Unit is GMP's covert internal investigations unit.
This is Overton Vale Farm near Wrexham in North Wales. John Buttress bought it in 2007 with his then wife as a house to live in and with a holiday lettings business on the side. With their investigation into police radios throwing up no wrongdoing, detectives began to look at other aspects of the Chief Inspector's life, including his mortgage arrangements for this place.
In 2011, Buttress and his wife divorced. The settlement meant that John Buttress kept their home, but the mortgage had to be rearranged and placed in his name only, with his bank Intelligent Finance. His new loan deal has now cost him his job, and it nearly led to him going to prison. In March 2013, the Chief Inspector was arrested by his own colleagues, part of what he says was a whole day of action against him.
With John Buttress under arrest at police headquarters, detectives swooped on this and 5 other locations connected to him. They raided the farmhouse here in North Wales and recently agreed to pay compensation for the damage caused. And later on, they even went to the expense of sending up the police helicopter to take aerial photographs, all as part of their investigation. It's the sort of action that you would expect for some sort of criminal mastermind, Mr. Big.
Indeed, we refer to things like, so-and-so's day of action when we are targeting very serious organised criminals. I've assisted with operations like that, but to find that directed at me.
Initially released on bail, John Buttress was eventually charged in August 2013.
John Buttress faced 2 allegations of mortgage fraud, that he'd taken on the wrong kind of loan for a property which also includes holiday lets, and that he was claiming that this was his main address, whereas in fact he lived in Manchester.
But just days before his Crown Court trial in January, the charge was dropped. It followed the late disclosure by the CPS of a page of crucial evidence that had inexplicably gone missing. The evidence appeared to show that the bank never had any problem with John Buttress. Detectives had known this for months. Had the missing page not turned up, John Buttress potentially may have gone to prison for something he clearly hadn't done. We've asked the CPS and GMP to explain what happened. Neither has done so. Still, John Buttress's ordeal was far from over. One mortgage fraud charge remained, and the CPS continued to prosecute him for having the wrong mortgage for his part-time holiday business. But the problem for the prosecution was that the bank did not seem to consider that it had been defrauded. All they'd asked John Buttress to do was to make an administrative change, for which they charged him £75.
You accept you did something wrong with the mortgage, but you put it right quickly. Is it a question of proportion, this?
Well, there's a question of proportionality, but also, was it criminal? At most, it was a civil contractual breach, which I hold my hands up to. I'm very sorry. I didn't realise I was doing anything wrong, nor did my ex-wife, and nor did the people in the house before us. But how that justifies £1 million of public money being spent on trying to nail me is simply beyond justification, in my view.
John Buttress was acquitted by the jury within 20 minutes.
John Buttress returned to work here at GMP and soon afterwards made a range of criminal allegations against some of his colleagues. He's accused 6 officers of offences including perjury, misconduct in a public office and making a false statement.
These accusations are now being investigated by a team of officers from Kent Police. But in May, John Buttress learned from GMP that he'd face a September gross misconduct hearing. He stood accused for a second time of effectively an identical charge to the one the jury had thrown out. The BBC asked to attend, but it was held in private. Today, the misconduct panel found John Buttress guilty and he was sacked.
I was going to say my duty as a police officer is not to shut up. I suppose now my duty as a member of the public is not to shut up. Those 11 criminal complaints that I've made against senior officers in this force, they need to be investigated and robustly investigated, and all the facts need to be out in the open.
John Buttress spoke to the BBC in uniform before he lost his job.
And I choose my words carefully. I believe there was corrupt police practice in targeting me. And I'm saying that sitting here in a police uniform in a BBC studio. I shouldn't have to be doing this, but I am.
We asked GMP about Steve Niblo and also the missing evidence. They didn't respond to our specific questions, but they did give us this statement.
This is the end of a process that began when the CPS felt there was sufficient evidence to take a criminal prosecution forward. Chief Inspector Buttress may have been acquitted in a Crown Court, but the burden of proof for breaching the standards of professional behaviour is based on the lower threshold of a balance of probabilities. He has been dismissed from GMP with immediate effect. A number of allegations have been made, and they are now being investigated by another police force.
Tonight, John Buttress is no longer a chief inspector with GMP. He may have left the force, but his allegations of corruption have not left with him.